All right, so we're going to continue our conversation looking at technology and its influence on culture. I hope you guys all liked the human robot video you watched last class that looked at kind of the advances of technology and biotechnology and maybe like the invention of artificial intelligence. So, in order to get to there, we have to look at the roots of technology and some of the functions it has within culture. Right, so what we know is that a basic definition of technology and how sociology understands it is that technology is any artificial means to extend human abilities. So if you used a toothbrush this morning or you combed your hair this morning, that's a bit of technology in the most simple form. It's a way of making human lives easier. So the way we understand it now is that technology is like a computer device. It needs to have some smart chip involved. But in reality, how sociology views it is just a simple tool. So, in order to break up bread so you can easily eat it, a knife would be a simple form of technology. It's a tool that allows us to make human lives easier. But it's not just the item itself, it's also the knowledge of how do you use that tool. All right, so your car, that is a bit of technology, but in order to use it, like we regulate that. You need to have a license in order to drive a car. You need to understand how to move the wheel, operate the pedals in order to actually drive that car, which means that technology is not useful unless you gain that knowledge. Uh, for example, most cars within the United States, they're automatic, they shift from gear to gear without you having to do anything. But if you travel internationally, a lot of the cars that are produced internationally are manual, where you have to know how to use the clutch and shift it yourselves. And so, in order to use technology, it's not just the item, but it's also the knowledge that comes along with it. Have you ever had to train your parents or grandparents or a sibling in how to use a new app or device that's generated? So, this technology is only useful in the sense where we know how to use it and operate it properly. To understand how technology works within our society, we have to look at both the manifest and the latent functions. We've talked about this a few times throughout the year. Right? So manifest functions, those are the specific reasons for why the technology exists. We talked about this when we were looking at the social institutions. So for example, school is a social institution and its manifest function is there to impart knowledge and help you learn and understand specific content and gather facts. So if we look at technology, I mean your car's main function is for transportation to get you from point A to point B. Your phone's manifest function, its main purpose of existing, is to allow you to talk to other people. So, usually, when technology is generated and created, it's with the manifest function in mind. It's the main purpose for why we need this tool and how it's going to help and benefit societies. But our technology can shift and change the way that societies function by understanding their latent functions. All right, latent functions are those unintended purposes of the technology. Right? So again, we talked about this with our social institutions. So a latent function of schools is that it teaches our social norms, how to interact with authority figures. It teaches you how to make friends, how to work in groups. And so it's not the imparting of facts, but it's all these other basic social norms for generating our social networks, which means all of our technology also has these latent functions. All right, our cars, their main purpose is to get you from point A to point B, but a latent function of them is that it gives you more independence. Gaining your driver's license is actually a mark of advancement. It's a sense of independence where you're not reliant on mom and dad to drop you off at different locations. It gives you more mobility. Instead of just relying on public transportation, you can base things on your own schedule. Right? Same things with phones. Right? The original intention of phones was just to allow you to talk with other people. But now they're almost our own personal assistants where they are alarm clocks, they set our calendars, they have these social media sites so that we can connect with people not just through voice but through texting or tweeting or sending out pictures on Instagram or TikTok or whatever you're using. Right? So these latent functions are these unintended consequences. And so a lot of what technology does is it shifts the way cultures work because of these latent functions that are present within our society. Right? With technology, as they grow and adapt, it actually changes the culture in and of itself. A lot of the values and the norms are impacted because of these new tools that make our lives easier. So, for example, in your history classes, you've probably studied the Industrial Revolution. And we're going to talk about this in a future sociology class. All right, well, part of the reason why the Industrial Revolution was so revolutionary is because it changed the way that people just created products. All right, we used to refer to it as a cottage industry, where products were made by individuals or by families. There was a lot of ownership, and so I know I made that product, and so I took a lot of pride in how well it was constructed. And so I took my time, I took dedication, and so I wasn't producing a lot of, I don't know, like chairs or something like that, but the chairs I constructed were very well made because my name, my family was tied to that product I was creating. But with factories, well, it was an industry that was making it. It wasn't my name, it was the company's name. And so things were less tied to the family, and people were mass producing these goods, which made them cheaper and easier to get. But some of the quality was sacrificed because of that. Right? Instead of people living in rural towns, we now moved to big cities. And so cities grew and populations expanded exponentially. But because of that, there was less of a tie to our family units. There was less of a pride within the name. And so there's been a correlation between the rise of these factory industries and a increased risk of divorce rates, right? This family unit, this family identity was no longer there. So people aren't necessarily tied to the family business. They can go and investigate their own individual interests. They can go and tie their identity to an industry. And so the family ties are a little bit weaker, right? Now, since people aren't tied to physical locations to do their job, they can telecommute more. Well, because of that, I'm also losing some of my company identity. I don't have as much loyalty to the first job I have. I'm not an industry man anymore. I'm not a company man anymore. I am my own individual person. And so because of that, we also find that there's less company loyalty now compared to just 30 years ago. And so what we find is that the technology actually changes the way that people relate to each other. With cars, people can now travel further distances. So instead of just being an urban or rural setting, we have more and more suburbs, people that can work and have their identity within the city, but they still live further out so they can have the space and the community. So a little bit of both worlds that are present there. With our phones, we can still stay connected to people. And so instead of relying on letters, which were the main form of communication, I can talk to you in the moment. We can even do FaceTime now with the advancement of what phones are capable of doing. And so these technology moments, they can change cultures and societies on even just the individual level. Right? But societies also impact the types of technology that we create. As values and norms are shifted based off of new collective behaviors, based off of new social movements, we develop new tools because that's what we need and value within the moment. All right, for example, our medications have advanced so much, our understanding of human diseases have advanced so much that people are living longer and longer and longer. which means we need to develop new technologies. We need to take care of this older population. And so there's more funding into things like maybe Alzheimer's research. We've advanced so much that we have medication available that will slow down the progression of the disease. And there is new medication that we're still working on to maybe prevent or cure this ailment. Before, disabilities were just something people had to deal with on their own, but our understanding of different abilities and trying to allow them to stay active members rather than people that are pushed off to the margins and the peripheries of societies means that we have new technologies built towards allowing them to remain integrated. Better prosthetics for people who've maybe lost a limb, new educational techniques for people who might have learning disabilities. And so what we value in our society also shifts and changes the types of technology that we have. Our understandings of the environment and the pollution that our cars are causing has led to more like electronic cars or eco-friendly cars. And so they're not reliant on carbon emissions in order to propel the engine. Our phones have advanced so much where we're not tied to a specific landline, but we have wireless connections, which means we're so reliant on technology that, like, without this, even during this pandemic moment, we have our distance learning because of the internet. And so some students in even rural areas where they don't have connections to their teachers, they can still reach out and call them, or we can do these video conferencings where if you zoom in, you can use those Wi-Fi elements to still talk with people. And so our technology is also generated by the values of that society. And so for today's lesson, we're going to look at just those little bits of elements. So use what we just talked about in this lesson, use what you saw within the human robot last class, and go through and do your notes for today and look at some of those manifest latent functions of technology and how it reflects and impacts the current cultures of that society.